You're not supposed to lean on the podium, but I'm going to lean on the podium. I really want to thank you for inviting me, because when you put something together, a presentation that makes you think and try to get your thoughts straight, and admittedly they're not usually straight, but I'll do my best on this. As Tim said, I'm from Bridgewater, Mass. I'm a member of Veterans for Peace, which is essentially an international organization of veterans, started in 1985. And I'm a member of the Boston chapter, the Smedley Butler chapter. Smedley Butler was a World War I Marine general who was disillusioned with World War I, and he made the famous statement. He said, "War is a racket. It has always been. It is possible the oldest, easily the most profitable, surely the most vicious. It is the only one international in scope. It is only one in which the profits are reckoned in dollars and the losses in lives." And he's our, whatever you want to call him, he's our hero, whatever. We look up to that statement, and we have my bumper sticker in my car is for us. I served during Vietnam. I didn't go to Vietnam, but I was an instructor sending young men to Vietnam, and I thought about it later that after the Army, that I was just as culpable in terms of Vietnam as somebody being there, because I taught young men to fire artillery shells at whomever, wherever they fell. Let me just also explain in this presentation, I'm not anti-American, I'm not a pacifist. I think we need a military. And I also think that the United States in some ways is unique. Not the way I'm going to describe it. I'm a firm believer in the Founding Fathers. I think the period from 1790 to 1800 was truly amazing, that they put together a Constitution with the Bill of Rights, and especially in comparison to what was going on in the rest of the world, that we have something unique. At the same time, I think we sometimes think we're special. The quote from John Winthrop, "We shall be as a city upon a hill, the eyes of the people are upon us." Well, I think that translates into how we fight wars and into the military. And basically, what I'm trying to get across today, my theme is that we think of ourselves when we fight, in terms of military, that what we're doing is for the better good. That we're doing things, that we're fighting, we're killing, and whatever, but in the long run, it's for the good of our country and maybe the world too. And I'm not sure that's true. We're basically told to trust the military. You do not have to question what going to war or a military spending. I found out maybe a year or two ago that Lowe's gives a military discount, 10% off everything except sale items. So I signed up for it. But now when I go in, the person at the register says, "Thank you for your service." And I don't know how to respond to that sometimes, because there's somebody in line and so forth. Thank you for fighting or training people to kill in a war that was basically illegal and wrong. So, it forces me to think. And we tend to think that throughout our wars that we come up with slogans. I mean, Wilson, "To make the world safe for democracy," 4 freedoms of Franklin Roosevelt. We want to protect the American way of life. We're fighting so that we won't have to fight over here. You notice that they always do that. I mean, just from the present Secretary of State, Pompeo, he said, "We will track down Iranian operatives and their Hezbollah proxies operating around the world and crush them. Iran will never again have carte blanche to dominate the Middle East." Well, think about that statement. I mean, there's so many things wrong with it, but it's thrown out there. And people forget history. George W. Bush, when he was in the Philippines, said, "A new totalitarian threat has risen against civilization." A new totalitarian threat. America is proud of its past, if it's part in the great story of the Filipino people. Does he realize that when we defeated the Spanish in the Philippines, the Filipinos thought they were going to be independent. And the United States simply walked in and said, "No, I don't think so." And he had a 4-year brutal fight where 4,000 Americans were killed and thousands of Filipinos disease. It was a terrible war, but it was supposed, and George Bush is saying, we did great things. I.F. Stone, the great reporter, said all governments lie. But disaster lies in wait for countries whose officials smoke the same hashish they give out. And I think a lot of our leaders do just that. We've had past wars. Think of the past wars. War of 1812, Mexican-American War, Spanish-American War, World War I, World War II, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan. The only war we were directly attacked was World War II. Essentially, all those other wars, we made a decision to go to war. You could argue World War I, the Germans with submarine warfare, but the other wars, we were the ones that were going. At least they were debated. In the modern times, I'm not sure that's going on. Let me just go through quickly some of the Vietnam and Iraq, and I'll touch on Afghanistan. Kyle will deal with that more than I will. But let me just go through Vietnam. I served during that war. As you know, there were roughly 58,000 Americans killed, 150,000 wounded, missing 1,600, 23,000 are on disability. But look at the other side. North Vietnam and Viet Cong dead 1.1 million. South Vietnam between 200 and 500,000. Civilian dead 2 million. We never seem to talk about that. When you notice during the Vietnam War, what got people against the war, I think one of the things was the reporting every day of American dead. We're not talking 1 or 2, 50 a day. And that helped drive the anti-war movement. What about civilians? Refugees, the environment. 14 million tons of explosives were dropped on Vietnam. That's twice the amount that we dropped during World War II. Trees, dams, canals destroyed. Agent Orange, as you know, was spewed throughout to kill the foliage. We bulldozed 1,200 square miles flat of Vietnam. Vietnam became an importer of rice where they were once an exporter. Monetary cost of Vietnam War, $1 trillion in today's dollars, plus another trillion for Vietnam for veterans benefits. The inflation that was caused by the war helped generate the economic crisis of the 70s. The anti-war protests took years to get over. Cambodia, the Khmer Rouge, as you know, the devastating Khmer Rouge was partly caused by the United States bombing of Cambodia. Do we think about that? Do we think about the fact that at some point the French said, we're out of here? And they walked away from Vietnam, and they're fine. We stepped in. And today, I believe I have a shirt made in Vietnam. Now, what did we save Vietnam from? Or try to save Vietnam from? And the scary thing is that today, in some ways, they're trying to rewrite the history of Vietnam. The Ken Burns film, I thought, was decent. There were some real problems with it. But I saw an article where the guy wrote, Vietnam was a success because Vietnam was the last country to go communist. You have to think about that. Okay, Iraq. George W. Bush, State of the Union. Iraq continues to flaunt its hostility towards America and to support terror. The Iraq regime has plotted to develop anthrax and nerve gas and nuclear weapons for over a decade. Dick Cheney simply stated there's no doubt that Saddam Hussein now has weapons of mass destruction. This is the one I like, Condoleezza Rice. We don't want the smoking gun to be a mushroom cloud. Those are our leaders basically telling Americans, lying about what is the problem going on. I remember at my own, as I was saying to somebody, I remember thinking to myself, even, let's say Saddam Hussein did have weapons of mass destruction. Does that mean going to war is the only way to do it, to solve the problem? I mean, you went through the whole period of the Cold War. We didn't attack Russia, and they had obviously a ton of nuclear weapons. Why? And I thought to myself, that's crazy. And that's how I got involved in the anti-war movement in terms of Iraq. The David Kay, the weapons inspector, said, despite evidence of Saddam's continued ambition to acquire nuclear weapons, to date we have not uncovered evidence that Iraq undertook significant post-1998 steps to actually build nuclear weapons. We couldn't wait. We had other reasons. American dead, just under 5,000. Civilian dead, 180,000 plus in Iraq. We destabilized the Middle East. Iran is stepping in. The beginning of ISIS. And Iraq is still struggling. What were we there for? What was the purpose of doing that? And yet, if you think about it, if you, as you all remember the period, there were protests, but in general, the American public went along with it. We followed the advice of our leaders. And it's not just the Republicans. The Democrats voted for that war too. So you can't blame one party here. And what I'm saying is we tend to go along with the idea that it's our country, we're doing good in the world, and you got to go along with it. Afghanistan, and I'll just touch on it and let Lyle do most of it. It's the longest war in our history. $45 billion cost up to date in 2018. The Brown Cost of War Project estimates nearly 200,000 civilians killed in Afghanistan and Pakistan. We think that using drone warfare, precision strikes, doesn't work all the time. We kill civilians, and killing civilians means you recruit people for terrorism. Taliban is there, we're here. Now just think about that. If we're fighting a group that is indigenous to the country, they're not going anywhere, and they can wait us out. The Russians invaded, remember, Afghanistan in 1980. They got in 89. They said, that's it, we're out of here. And for some reason or other, our leaders cannot simply say they can walk away from it. Just think of Johnson. I mean, he knew Vietnam wasn't working, but he couldn't pull out. He couldn't bring the troops out, and it destroyed his presidency. General Stanley McChrystal said, I felt like we were high school students who had wandered into a mafia-owned bar when he describes going to Afghanistan. Has anybody ever told you what our objectives are? You notice they change. Cost, $1 trillion. There was this, these are, I took this from, I'm sorry, I forgot what website. This person, this was during President Obama's presidency. He had questions for President Obama regarding Afghanistan and Iraq. He said, if I could ask Obama questions, this is what I would ask him. How many American deaths have we experienced in these countries, both before and after you assumed the presidency? How many civilian deaths have occurred? How many civilians have become refugees? How would you describe your reaction to the level of violence currently in these countries? How would you describe and what are your reactions to the political situation in Iraq and Afghanistan? Was our involvement in each country worth the cost we experienced? I don't think we ever asked that question. Is it worth the cost? How would you rate the return on investment in them since you became president? Recently, there has been much talk about the financial and emotional costs of the wars in terms of the wounded and who return home. Could you give us a sense of the dimensions of the burden of people coming home? Trauma, he asked. I like this last one. Finally, would you send your daughters to fight in Iraq and Afghanistan? That's an interesting question, and obviously we have a pretty good idea how we'd react. The other thing, the last war I want to touch on, I just want to talk about military spending for a minute, is Yemen, which is basically the war that is not even talked about very much. Now, we are not directly involved, but we're indirectly involved, if you read the news. It's a 4-year war. It's considered the worst humanitarian crisis in the world. 3/4 of the population is in desperate needs. Half the children are malnourished. 8 million on the brink of famine. 10,000 civilians have been killed in Yemen. What's going on? Well, it's complicated, of course, but the one side which we support is the Saudi coalition. Now, whether you realize it or not, we are supporting them in a number of ways. Drone attacks, we refuel their aircraft, landmines, cluster munitions, a number of things. We are actively supporting that. Now, you could say, I mean, you could argue, well, it's important that we do that. But my point is, we don't even talk about it. Have you ever heard Congress debating the war in Yemen? No.
They voted against it.
They refuse?
They don't want, yeah, they don't want to talk about it. And my whole point is, that we as a nation don't talk about things like this. We just go along with our leaders for whatever reason. Okay, lastly, the military budget. As you know, the tragedy of well, military budget is, forget about Trump. I mean, even before Trump was way out of whack. But with the fiscal 2019 budget, the base budget is roughly $600 billion. We spend more than the next 7 or 8 countries combined. Our increase in 2019, $80 billion, surpasses any other country's total military budget except China. Think about that. We are roughly 5% of the world's population, yet we spend almost 50% of the military expenditures around the world. James Mattis, Secretary of Defense, it is incumbent upon us to feel the more lethal force of our nation is to retain the ability to defend ourselves and what we stand for. I don't know what that means. What do we stand for? If we stand for human rights, if we stand for voting and so forth, let's try to do that. Supposedly, we seem to have some enemy. After World War II was the Cold War, then terrorism. Now the term is, I've learned, it's interstate strategic competition. Interstate strategic competition. That is the new buzzword that we're fighting now. That means we're competing with China and Russia. I just heard something that since the Russians have a fleet, I guess they're moving some ships to the Atlantic, that we need to have, we resurrect the fleet there also. Plus, the Pentagon's wasteful. 1 out of every 5 tax dollars that goes to the Pentagon is wasted. If you followed, one of the things I follow, which is the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter, I don't know if ever you followed it, was developed, they started to develop it 16 years ago. They plan to build 2,400 of these things, 265 produced. They're going to cost, at the cheapest, $180 million a piece, going up to $300 for the Navy version. They don't work. There are constant problems with this thing. And some people think this should have been junked a long time ago, but it won't be. The Lockheed Martin, who manufactures it, made sure that parts of it are built in just about every state. And even though Congress knows this plane is not working right, they continue to fund it, and they will continue to fund it. It's going to be around the world. As Trump said, the budget agreement today is so important for our great military, Trump tweeted. It ends a dangerous sequester and gives Secretary Mattis what he needs to keep America great. Republicans and Democrats must support our troops and support this bill. That's outrageous. That's simply outrageous. Okay, I'll quickly finish. Think about, we always talk about if you take money from the military budget, where it could go. We know there are places. We are the wealthiest nation on earth, but we trail behind other nations in life expectancy, infant mortality, education level, housing, clean air, water. In 2015, the defense industry mobilized a small army of 718 lobbyists and doled out more than $67 million to pressure Congress. We have 6,250 nuclear warheads. Under Obama, we're going to spend another $1.2 trillion for a new generation of nuclear warheads. Yet, this new budget cuts the EPA by 25%, transportation by 18%, HUD by 14%, education by 5%, so forth and so on. The American Society of Civil Engineers gives the United States a D+ in terms of our infrastructure. I'm from Massachusetts. The MBTA needs $7.3 billion to fix everything. What do we do? Well, I don't know. Sometimes I get pretty depressed because I'm not sure what we can do. But my feeling is this, that I honestly believe that the situation we have right now, in terms of the military budget, in terms of our wars, is probably not going to change very much. But we as individuals, you, me, if you feel that we're doing something wrong, the country is doing something wrong, you have to at least speak out for yourself. You have to be able to say something, you know, and just get into the street sometimes. Speaking out can be difficult. Years ago, well, 10 years ago or so, I tried to do counter-recruiting at our local high school, Bridgewater Raynham, and got nowhere. And it got heated. And because it got heated, you challenge the status quo, and I was called a communist. It's very difficult to go up, to speak out above the crowd in a sense. I.F. Stone again says, when war comes, reason is regarded as treason. When war comes, reason is regarded as treason. And it's not just war. I think it's just trying to go against the status quo. You were immediately put aside, and something's wrong with you. And my only point is this: that we as individuals, if you know that we're not doing something right, with regard, especially with regard to the military and the war, you have to speak out. You have to do something, even if it's a little thing. And hopefully, in the long run, that what we say, what we do, will have some influence. I mean, one little thing, I think back, it just occurred to me. The ACLU wanted to get towns in Massachusetts to go against the Patriot Act and get a resolution. And some of us went before our town meeting at the time in Bridgewater, and we got it passed. But the good thing was, people at least listen to each other. We don't talk to each other. We look at our phones all the time. So I guess my point is, keep trying, and I thank you.